Good evening. I'm going to tell you about the history of radio. Now, what is a radio? Radio is a device that transmits or receives radio waves. A simple radio works with an antenna, a diode demodulator, capacitor, an inductor, a speaker, and something to ground it with. Of course, many radios got more complicated than that, but that's not our subject for today. 1889, the concept of radio was first proven by Henrik Hertz, followed by French inventor Edouard Branly, who made the first radio receiver in 1890 called the Corsair. Then, in 1894, Marconi, John Fleming, and Nikola Tesla invented the wireless telegraph, which worked much like telegraphs on land, but instead of transmitting their signals by landline, they would transmit their signals by radio waves. They were quite useful for ships sailing overseas to communicate with each other, especially the Titanic, which also had a radio telegraph. Then, in 1904, John Fleming invented the Fleming valve, which later became the vacuum tube. A vacuum tube works by heating up filaments inside it, which you can then use to control electric current. And thus started the golden age of radio. Now back then, radios would have to take a while to get going because they contained many vacuum tubes. And thus had to warm each of them up before getting to work. Many of these radios would act as amplifiers or control the current inside these radios.
Always take care and good. Experience the difference today.
Then, 1939, Robert Watson invented the radar, with the radar dishes being quite massive. Edwin Armstrong then invented FM radio, which wasn't quite as popular as it is today. Then, in 1950s, television was then invented. And in 1957, Soviet Union launched the first man-made satellite, Sputnik, which would orbit the Earth and transmit its radio signal, which could be heard around the world. In the 1970s, the transistor was invented, which would soon replace the vacuum tube because the transistor works a lot more efficiently as it requires less power and heat. By that time, thus, electronics could be made more compact. By that time, FM radio also started to become popular.
Free lunch from Nuke Scenery. If you listen to Bama Country at work, simply sign up at BamaCountry.com.
The car phone was also invented, which was essentially a cell phone, but wasn't handheld. It wasn't until 1980s when the Dynatac 8000X was invented, which was essentially a brick. In the 1980s, GPS was also invented. Then early 90s, cell phones started to become more and more popular. And then late 90s, Wi-Fi was invented. And, and from 2010 onwards, 4G and 5G networks started becoming a thing. During that time, in-flight entertainment was also installed in aircraft. So, needless to say, radio has come a long way, and I am looking forward to what comes next in the future.